In the last 3 years, I have taught various courses, seminars, programs to senior decision makers, corporate, government, NGOs, critical national infrastructures, response agencies, Olympic management committees, city managers in 17 countries. And the first question I always ask is, what is the number one thing that can go wrong in crisis management? When we have to move, when we have to do something, what causes us grief almost from the beginning? I'll ask you that question now. And I imagine that a large percentage of you will be saying communications. It is always communications. Communications is what makes us lose control faster than anything else within a crisis management sphere. And we know that. And yet seemingly there is nothing we can do about it. Because every time we come into another problem, puts our systems under pressure, puts our organizations under pressure, it is communications that we lose control of almost from the beginning. If there's one thing that I think anyone involved in strategic risk and crisis management should do more than they are doing now, it is that they should read more. They should read. There is a clear differentiator between those people who do read and those people who do not read. And if you do read, then the way you conceptualize crisis management, your understanding of it, your terminology, the case studies you're aware of, the way that you create structures and frameworks out of chaos, seeming chaos, will be deeper, richer, stronger, more well-developed, and more appropriate and capable of standing up in the challenges that crisis throw at us. You should read reports, reviews, papers. There's a multitude, myriad of things out there. It's on LinkedIn every morning. I spend about 20, 30 minutes if I can, just looking through and flicking through and looking at reports and links to things. It's a valuable way of spending time and drinking your first coffee of the day. But what you should do more than anything else, I believe, is you should read the reviews of other crises that have happened. Any crisis that has occurred will almost certainly have a series of reviews, maybe legal, maybe corporate, maybe regulatory. Luckily, you don't have to read the reports because they're long and they're detailed. What you should do, in my opinion, is read the executive summaries. That is 1 or 2 pages at the front, which sums up and encapsulates the lessons learned, the main points covered within the review. And by the time that you read your 5th or your 6th or your 20th or your 50th or whatever it might be, you will realize that they are all exactly the same. The incidents are completely different. But the reasons for failure to manage those crises effectively, to use frameworks and methodologies that had been put in place and tried and tested and exercised, and yet when it came to testing them in the fire of reality, not only did they not work, they collapsed. And it can be seen almost from the beginning that they were simply not fit for purpose, in that they could not deliver that which they should deliver when a crisis occurred. It's no good having capabilities that work in theory on a Tuesday afternoon when you're sitting in the executive boardroom running through an exercise. It has to work in a crisis. To a certain extent, that is an unfair statement, because by definition, the study of crisis management tends to be the study of failure. We don't know about the operations that worked. But within that, there are valuable lessons to be learned. It is one of the truisms of the study of crisis management that we learn more from large operations, large projects, large failures. There's no it is not random the fact that we always refer back to 9/11. We refer back to Hurricane Katrina in 2005 or Fukushima in Japan in 2011. We look at Deepwater Horizon, BP Deepwater Horizon. We look at Chernobyl. We look at 3 Mile Island. We look at NASA and Challenger in Colombia. We look at Grenfell Tower now. And we will be looking at COVID-19 for generations to come. And the reason is because the lessons that we need to learn are clearly standing up there. And if you read those executive summaries, then it is almost certain that within the first 2 or 3 points, 2 words or 2 phrases will be used. The first word is overwhelming. By definition, crises are overwhelming. They go beyond what we expected or conceived of. COVID-19 has gone beyond anything anyone conceived of. That is not to say that they shouldn't have been ready for it. That is another matter for another discussion. But nevertheless, it's gone beyond anything anybody had any frameworks in place for. And that is the nature of a crisis. If they had had those frameworks in place, had been ready, then probably it would be a major incident, but not a crisis that we're living through right now. So the first word is overwhelming. The second word or the second phrase will be the collapse of communication, the communication failure. And to be honest, if communication doesn't fail, the likelihood is that you will have the capabilities and frameworks to allow you to, in some way, move your own operation forward in a way that is more or less appropriate to the demanding and challenging environments you're operating in. But it is a failure to maintain information exchange throughout your system that is almost certainly the cause of the major failure points that any crisis management situation sees. So today we're going to be looking at communication. I will make a prediction, not knowing who you are, not knowing what you do, not knowing what sector or environment you do. I will actually make a prediction about your life, your working life. Because my feeling is that if you're watching this, you probably have some level of responsibility, maybe very, very high, maybe national, maybe local, but to you and to those around you, it's critical. And I will make 2 predictions about you, your life. The first is that you have 2 main responsibilities. Not knowing what you do, not knowing what sector you're in, but you have 2 main responsibilities. The first responsibility is to ensure excellence of service delivery for whatever it is you are responsible within your organization. So that that part of the service delivery for which you are responsible will be able to support the organization in its overarching objectives, daily activities, both in normal operational status and in the event that something was to happen or something disruptive was to occur. You could step forward and bring your expertise and insight and understanding, capabilities, your toolbox, if you wish, and work with others within your organization to create innovative solutions to emergent problems and to bring it to some sort of satisfactory conclusion. And your responsibility is to ensure you have that capability on the individual, the group, and the corporate basis. That's your first. And to be honest, if I was to ask you how are you doing, out of 20, you'd probably say 12 to 16, somewhere around there. More than 17, I probably won't believe you, with no disrespect, I don't believe you. Most organizations can't hit 17 or above. Less than 12, either you get sacked or your organization will fail because there's a certain level of inbuilt dysfunctionality there. So 12 to 16, I think, is a reasonable range to go for. But there's also another responsibility you have. And that is to act as the gatekeeper to the external networks. I am sure that you are the critical gatekeeper between your organization and some aspect of the outside world, the wider economy or the wider ecology that we work within. And that part of your role is to act as a gatekeeper, a connector, a conduit, if you wish, between your organization and that outside ecosystem. and to build networks and collaboration, information exchange, etc., etc. And the truth of the matter is that when we have a crisis, when something goes wrong, when our systems are put under pressure, it is not within our organizations that we fail. We know what we're doing. It is the inability to create those collaborative relationships, those external information exchange frameworks and capabilities that not only do not work, but almost collapse almost immediately. And we can see that in any crisis situation we look at, including COVID-19. So now what we're going to do is we're going to look at that. We're going to take that apart. We're going to see, well, what are the components around that? And then hopefully there'll be things that we talk about that in some way intuitively will have sense or meaning for you. And you will think about your own organization. And then you can take what we are talking about, and exploring and playing around with, and take it back, make it your own, do something with it. And in some ways, hopefully, improve your organization, make it a better organization, both in normal operational times and in the event that you have to respond to a crisis event. One of the truths of crisis management is you cannot expect your organization to suddenly change and create capabilities in the middle of a crisis that do not exist there previously. If you do not have the ability to do things in normal operational status, it's highly unlikely that you're going to develop those capabilities in the middle of a crisis, whatever crisis that might be. So the first thing when we talk about communication is, what does that mean? When we talk about communication, what does that mean? Basically speaking, we're talking about two things. One is the act, and the other is the objective. The act is communicating, it's what we do. But the objective is information exchange. We want to move information around. We want to maintain the flow of information through our system. So it seems to me that if you, the decision maker, the policy setter, the manager, the leader, went to your team and said, or if you were lower down, went to your boss and said, boss or team, sit down for a second, I want to have a chat. Information exchange. How good are we at that? How good are we at managing information exchange between ourselves, between the people within our organization, between the people? Tell me, how good are we? Are we as good as we think we are? Do we test it? Do we check it? Are we blasé about it? And it seems to me that if you just ask that question and nothing else, and raise your cognition, raise your understanding of the importance of that question, you will be a better organization just by having that cognition. Even if you do nothing else. Of course, you should do something else. But just by asking that question, something will have changed within you and your teams and your organization. Of course, that is not enough. So let's say that we're talking about transfer of information. Seems reasonable. That is what the lawyers would say is necessary, but not sufficient. If that's all you've got, you're not looking at a crisis event. So it's not the transfer of information, it's a transfer of complex information. That's the challenge, complex information. Because every single person, both within your organization and those external networks which you are a gatekeeper to, and of course everybody else who you're dealing with is also a gatekeeper to their own external network. Everybody in your team, everybody on the crisis management team, everybody on the executive committee is also a gatekeeper, critical gatekeeper to their own external networks. And each of those is exchanging highly complex information all the time under normal operational status. But certainly that has a criticality when it comes to crisis events. So we've already moved up. We've moved from transfer of information to transfer of complex information. We have to add something else now. It is a transfer of complex information under pressure. And the transfer of complex information under pressure now starts creating a crisis environment. Because this is not chess where you can sit there, think about it, look at options, try and think forward, come back, think about something else. The event itself is creating a pressure on you that may well be unprecedented, that may have never happened to you in your life before. You're working under an adrenaline dump. That seems to put you almost into a dream world. I'm sure that the governments around the world are looking at wake up every morning thinking, have I woken up from my nightmare yet? And so you're trying to create a picture of what's going on, exchanging information with multiple players. And the problem is that the information that you're receiving, it is not that you don't have enough information. We'll come to that when we look at decision making. But you have a multitude of information coming in, which is untested, unverified, which is confused, maybe coming in from people who do not speak your language, or you may be operating in a language which is not your own natural language, and therefore you have the additional pressure of that. I'm sure that many of you listening to me, watching me now, have had the experience where you've been running an operation and you've had 2 phone calls coming at exactly the same time. And one phone call has said to you, boss, the bridge is open, the bridge is open. And at exactly the same time, you get another phone call saying, boss, bridge is closed, it's down, can't use it. How many of you are saying yes to me now? I'm sure a lot of you are saying yes to me now. So we are operating within an environment where there's confusion, there's chaos, communication is breaking down. Our systems may be breaking down, we may lose connectivity, etc., etc. So we've now moved up into communications and exchange of complex information under pressure. And then we have to add one more component. And that is communication is the exchange of complex information under pressure between multiple stakeholders. And each of those stakeholders has their own agenda, have their own priorities, have their own pressures, have their own points of focus. They are both giving and receiving and sharing information all the time. And there's an incredibly, incredibly complex network of information exchange going on. And the truth of the matter is that your responsibility as a crisis manager is not to tell people what to do. If somebody is in the river at 2 o'clock in the morning, which is flooding, they know what they have to do. If someone's on the front line in a hospital and being overwhelmed, they know what they have to do. Your job is not to tell them what to do. Your job is to make sure that they know what is going on, that they have that overarching picture, in which, and we'll speak about it in other sessions, but it's the almost single, most overriding priority that you as a crisis manager have. And that is to maintain a COP, common operating picture. And if you're able to maintain a common operating picture that all of your stakeholders, or as many as is reasonably possible, have a shared understanding of what is happening, you're in the game. And it is the breakdown of those frameworks and structures and processes and protocols that creates failures or breakages, fractures in your communication management within your own and external networks. That is the single most critical point in differentiating between something that can successfully move forward within the chaos of a crisis event and something that just fails at the first hurdle or fails whenever that happened. And so we have here in pictogram now. Let's have a look at that and how that works. Let's learn from reality. You can always learn from reality. So let's have a look at some academic work around that. And we'll go to Naim Kapoor, a well-known conceptualist and thinker who specializes in the understanding of complex organizational frameworks in the dynamics of high impact and chaotic situations. And he wrote a very powerful paper, which you can see the reference to below, which is in our library, in 2005, around the complex communication networks that came out of 9/11, 2001. So the picture you should see up in front of you right now is a SITREP network, SITREP situational report for FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency in New York. And as you can see, there's multiple agencies, many government agencies, but others as well. And this is designed to try and create a information sharing exchange mechanism, which allows information which enters the system anywhere at any point to be shared amongst multiple players and stakeholders. What is interesting from one perspective is that if you look at the bottom, just right of center, right at the bottom, that is where the president is. And the president, with all due respect, sir or ma'am, we are very, very busy right now, and we will let you know when we have something to tell you. I'm sure that anybody who's worked operations know that one of the main challenges of running a serious operation is to keep the bosses out of the room when you're busy. And I think having the president down at the bottom on the right-hand side is a good sign of what the nature of leadership is in different situations. And sometimes leadership is allowing those people who really know what they're doing to get on with it. Nevertheless, as a framework, it's only as good as the operators. There's a number of things we can learn from here. And first of all, and the main thing is you cannot use this only as a crisis response mechanism. I mentioned it previously, I'll mention it again, I'll probably mention it again after this because it's worth saying repeatedly. You cannot introduce mechanisms or protocols or technology in the middle of a crisis. It will not work, and it will become a failure point. It will upset everything that you're trying to do because the people you're trying to get to use it will not understand how to use it. It hasn't been. They may not have the equipment on them. They may not know how to use the equipment or the protocols. And so from an organizational perspective, one of the things that we would look for is BAU plus, business as usual plus. You have surge capacity. You're able to expand and extend your capabilities, but they are capabilities that are normalized as part of your normal operational activities. You cannot bring in something that is not part of your normal activities. There is nothing that you can do where you can learn doing it once a month. If you can learn to play the violin or a language by doing it for 3 hours on an afternoon once a month, which is how most organizations may be, if they're good, spend time on their crisis management activities, then I would accept that you can learn crisis management in the same way. But you can't. And so what we'd expect to see is things that are part of your normal operational activities having surge capacity in order to expand and to use that to set the foundation, the framework for anything else you might need to do. And so the important thing within this sort of framework is that it is used on a daily basis. It should be every 4 o'clock every afternoon. A report should go out to everybody, shared with the same format, the same protocols, and people get used to it, and that's fine. And because they're used to it, you can now use that to surge up and hand around crisis management information. But you can't have this as a network which is kept in reserve, and then you try and use this when you're in the middle of the crisis, when in the middle of the panic that's going on, the chaos that's going on, and so you say, well, let's start using this. That would not work. There's one other point, of course, which I haven't mentioned yet, which is absolutely critical and which almost nobody ever mentions, which is if you, the person, you now listening to me, if you have a crisis management framework, which you've tested and you've trusted, have you tested it at 2 o'clock on a Sunday morning? Because that's probably when a crisis is going to happen. Especially if you're working within a global environment where 2 o'clock Sunday morning may be 5 o'clock in the afternoon somewhere else, 11 o'clock in the morning for somebody else. I don't know almost any organization that have actually found out, can we do this stuff at 2 o'clock on a Sunday morning? It's just the first thing. Nevertheless, this should work. The problem is, that's not how a crisis works. And so this is a pictogram, this is an example of a 6-rep network in normal operational status. This is on a Tuesday afternoon when nothing's gone wrong. I'll ask you now, what do you think is going to happen when something goes wrong? It's what the Americans would call going right of bang. Left of bang is preparation, and then something happens, you go to right of bang, you go into your response and recovery, whatever it might be. And if you go right of bang, then what is going to happen almost immediately is this. And the question is, and the question has to be, does your organization have the capability and the capacity and the bandwidth to manage the transition which we've just seen from normal operational status to crisis status? And the answer is, no, it doesn't. It doesn't. You don't, I don't, nobody has. Nobody has that capacity, because you cannot keep that spare capacity around doing nothing for the one time it might happen. And so now I think we understand why it is that within the first 2 paragraphs or points of that executive summary, which hopefully you're reading now, the issue of communication and information exchange failure becomes paramount. Why? Because that is what happens. Organizations don't have the bandwidth. And so immediately we are working in an environment where not only are we not getting information, but of course we don't know the information that we don't know. We don't know what we're missing. We can presume we're missing something. But that's not the bad news. That's not the bad news yet. That's still to come. Because anybody who understands this sort of stuff, and I'm sure many of you do, will say, but what you've done is you've only mapped the connections between the identified players. What you haven't yet mapped is the external networks, which of course everybody has. And that's a very strong point, and it's a very valid point. So now what we will do is we will add on to what we've just done our external networks. And here we go. And there you have it. You have 20 or so main players having over 1,200 dependent agencies. Every one of those dots is an agency. And those agencies are saying, I need to know what is going on. Is the airport open or closed? Yes or no? Are schools going to be open? Yes or no? Are the banks going to be open? Yes, I need to know that, because we as organizations have our own networks and our own cascading decision trees. And I'm waiting for information from you to know what's going on, because we need to move people, we need to make decisions, we need to share information. And now I think we start getting an understanding of the single issue around this, which is complexity. Complexity is the thing that knocks us all out. And so when you look at your own systems, what I hope is you'll now have an understanding of the likely impacts of any event will have on your own communications and information management structures. So that was that. But we haven't finished. Because if we leave it there, then you go, right, okay, pretty scary story. Not sure what I can do with it. Okay, fine, I get it. So what? What are you going to bring me that helps me? And that's a very good question. And so now I'll bring you something that will help you. So let's take a look at an event. Here we have it on the screen, I hope. And something goes bang. At the moment something goes bang, whatever it is, doesn't matter what it is. It could be a lorry breaking down outside your front door. It could be a package, an unknown package. It could be an IT failure. It could be terrorist attack somewhere else. It could be a water leak. Doesn't matter. It's an event. And as soon as that event happens, there are 2 universal forces which come into play, which you cannot do anything to prevent. The first universal force is the need to make decisions. And as you can see from this line, in the beginning, you're making incredibly critical decisions. In COVID-19, do we go into lockdown in our cities or do we not go into lockdown in our cities? Do we do testing? Do we not do testing? Do we go for herd immunity? Do we shut our borders? These are big decisions. These are decisions that will set the pathway for everything that will come in the future. And then as you move through time and you develop through the situation, that flattens out and the decisions you make become less critical. They sort of are more part of sustaining an ongoing momentum rather than creating something that is completely new and unknown. And at the same time that you have that line, you're trying to grapple and wrestle with that line in terms of decision making. You have another universal truth, power, energy, which you can do nothing about. And that is this second line, which is seemingly a upside down reflection of the first one. And that's true, it is, because it's pathways reflection, and that is information. So at the beginning of this situation, whatever it might be, you have no information, and yet you have to make decisions. And as you move through time, you gradually start getting information. And there usually comes a time, and I'm sure many of you experience this, where suddenly things click in and suddenly all this information starts coming together, you start making sense of it, you start getting understanding, almost an understanding of what's going on. You don't have a detail, but at least you have a feeling of, okay, I get it, I understand what's happening now. And at that stage, we can say that those two lines are crossing. When you get it, then we can start saying that your decision making and the information you're gathering and getting is somehow sort of crossing. And at this stage, we can draw a line down and we can say at this point in time, we can now claim that we have information-based decision-making. Of course, it may be intuitive and it may be all those sorts of things, but nevertheless, we have information. So I think that the lesson, the single lesson from this last half hour or so is this. If by understanding how this works, and if by understanding how we can bring some things into our own organization to help enable us to deal with that more effectively, then what we do is we create a capability to bring that line of information gathering earlier. We can gather more information, better, make sense of it, integrate it, use it to make better decisions. And as you see on the graph, what that does is, indisputably, it brings that crossing of the line of information-based decision-making earlier in the game. And by doing that, we can demonstrate clearly the benefits to an organization from more effective information management, communication, information exchange, the transfer of complex information under pressure between multiple stakeholders. There is no magic and there is no voodoo, and unfortunately there's no magic dust that we can sprinkle. But if we can get this stuff right, then we're bringing benefit to our organizations and to our people and everything else. That's all we can do. So that is today's lesson, if you wish: communication, communication, communication. But it's not magic. There's a methodology to it. And you, the decision-making, the policy maker, the leader, the manager, have the ability to go into your organizations and ask a simple question. Information exchange. How good are we? And that's a good question to ask. Thank you very, very much for your time. I look forward to seeing you soon.